There's a sort of paradoxical circle of human interaction where the most selfish thing you can do is not be selfish because it reaps rewards that are better than the rewards you get for being selfish. If that makes sense, the most self-interested thing you can do is be kind to other people.
Welcome to Titular Characters.
Hello, my darlings. It's me, your lovely and adorable host, Eva Webb. As a writer, how do you get your readers to engage with your story? What makes something interesting and instantly recognizable? I'm here with writer, director, producer, actor, philosopher, and activist, David Avallone. That's quite a list. Anyway, David, hey! How's your day going?
My day is going. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, which because we were chatting at 3 or 4 in the morning.
I know it's my fault. I apologize.
Oh, no, it's not your fault at all. I was uploading the latest episode of my podcast, and I had an angry old cat that was like, well, if you're awake, I see no reason why you should be doing anything other than playing with me. So that was a lot of work. But yeah, no, I'm good. It's this whole year, this whole crazy, weird pandemic year, I have to be thankful that for a variety of reasons, I've been busy the whole year. I've had something to do. I haven't been idle. And if I had been, I think I would be in not great shape psychologically. And some of that is self-created. I did start doing literally 2 podcasts so that I wouldn't go insane and so that I wouldn't have that closet full of suits just sitting there not getting worn, certainly. And I'm a little surprised. Like, I looked the other day in my Pulp Today podcast, I'm on episode 30, and I'm just like, how did that happen? But at the beginning, it was like very early in the pandemic, and I was bored out of my mind. So when I started out, I did the crazy thing of like doing 3 episodes a week, and then sanity prevailed, and I went, we can do about 1 a week. And then I think I took all of July off because it was so crazy hot in Los Angeles. I literally I don't know that I can put a shirt on to record this. Like my choices are do it with the air conditioning on and have it sound terrible, or be incredibly uncomfortable. So I was like, I'll take a little downtime.
I'm sorry.
But that's all right. Now, by that time, I had like 20 episodes up. So I'm like, you know what? Let people slowly but surely discover these. Oh, good. And my cat is now drinking out of my water glass. That's awesome. I have 3 of the little monsters running around, so I have to. They keep me on my toes.
Yeah, you were talking about that last night. You said it was just a complete coincidence that you happened to write a comic book about cats, where there's 3 cat protagonists.
It is funny that like all of that really came from Kevin, and what's even crazier is the 3 breeds that the cats are. There's a black cat, and there's sort of a fluffy gray cat, and there's sort of a tigery cat, even though she's orange, and my tigery cat is the darker color.
And that's Kevin Eastman.
Kevin Eastman.
Yeah.
But yeah, Kevin and Troy Little, great Canadian artist, cartoonist, did the main design, and I didn't say, okay, I had wanted Otomo to be a black cat, and but I hadn't really said much about the other. I'm trying to remember if I even said Otomo should be a black cat. I feel like they evolved that way, and when I saw the first sketch, I was like, huh, those are my cats. Cool.
That's awesome.
And they have a little bit, my black cat is a super grumpy, angry all the time cat, so that kind of works with Otomo. And I named the ragdolls. I think that was my idea when Kevin had originally conceived them as lizards, as the radically rearranged Ronin reptiles. I don't think he got around to naming them. I think they were just the RRR, the reptiles. And then when at the last minute we made them cats, we were talking about like, the Ninja Turtles are named after Renaissance painters, which I love that Hannah Gadsby seems obsessed with that detail and has referred to it in both of her comedy specials, which makes me very, very happy. And I thought, let's reflect the whole Japanese culture influence on the Turtles and have them be animators. And if you look closely, their costumes and their personas, but their costumes even reflect the personality of the art created by the director they're named after. So Miyazaki is the spiritual one, and Miyazaki is wearing Nausicaa's little flying helmet because Nausicaa is my favorite Miyazaki film. And Tezuka, who's named after the creator of Astro Boy, the amazing Tezuka, has bright red Astro Boy boots. And Otomo, the violent Otomo, named after the creator of Akira, has the red motorcycle jacket from Akira. And Troy came up with this great thing that instead of it being, in the original, there's a pill on the back of the jacket, and Troy drew a piece of salmon nigiri, a piece of sushi, because she's a cat. she's not popping pills. She's not popping pills. She's eating fish. So thought it was
and sushi no less. That is awesome.
Well, the origin story. I don't know if you had time to read that first issue, but they're raised by. They're not raised by a giant rat. They're raised by an elderly woman who runs a sushi restaurant in Queens. So, and that was a big part of it. Is while we wanted it to be a pastiche of the Ninja Turtles, I didn't want it to be like note for note because I thought that was essentially boring. So, like, we decided, their mentor is going to be a woman who's a sushi chef, and that's where they learn all their knife skills from. And that's the joke of that. It's not like, no, it has to be another mutated animal. Like that, we didn't need to go that far. The origin story is very different. We did repeat the joke of, the Turtles they're part of the Daredevil origin story. I don't know if you remember that, but like literally the canister that hits Matt Murdock in the eyes and blinds him and makes him Daredevil rolls down the street, hits a kid carrying a terrarium with turtles, and they get radioactively enhanced by the same stuff that, obviously for legal reasons, he's not identified as Matt Murdock, but it's definitely that. So we did the thing of they're being experimented on by our universe's version of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is called Draw. And Draw has them in this secret facility where they're being experimented on. It's rated by our universe's version of it's funny. All I can think of is the names of the other things that are related to Hydra. Chaos from Get Smart, Spectre from the Bond movies, Thrush from the Man from U.N.C.L.E. series. They're called Flush in our universe. And there's a joke that's set up that I kind of love this stuff. There's a joke that's set up about the name that I haven't gotten around to yet. Which is they're named Flush because they are a flush beats a draw in poker, and they are the antagonists of Draw. And there will eventually be a scene where the head of Flush's henchmen are like, do we have to be called Flush? It's like super embarrassing. And he's like, no, Flush beats a draw. Yeah, dude, that's not the only meaning of the word flush. Like there's another meaning.
That's awesome.
So yeah, Flush raids the facility, and as they're escaping, they're already being given this like intelligence enhancing drug, though they don't know that they're cats. They have no idea what experiments are being done on them. And as they're running away from all the fighting and gunfire, they run through the genetic mutagen room, the cosmic ray room, and the gamma ray room. So they have the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and the Hulk origins all sort of compressed together. And that plus whatever drug they were being given turns them into walking upright martial arts fighting cats. So it's a super fun premise. And we did one issue, maybe the most flattering moment in my entire comic book career, when I did the first the outline, Eastman read it and he said, I think I'm gonna do layouts for this. And I was like, really? Because the man doesn't have a lot of time on his hands to draw stuff. And I thought that would give it such the texture and feeling of the Turtles in a way that even if you didn't notice it, you'd feel it in the layouts. And then Troy inked over Kevin's layouts.
And the cover on that book really did feel like looking back in time at an early Ninja Turtles book. Before my eyes could even read the title on it, I was like, oh, Ninja Turtles.
You know what's funny and probably is for the best is I'm the wrong age to be a huge Ninja Turtles fan. I'm like a minute too old. I'm the age that I was in college when the comic book came out. And when I read the first issue, which of course I think about this now and I could cry if I think about it too long. I bought the first issue in a comic book store. I read it and I handed it to a friend of mine and he never gave it back.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, man, I could probably get that thing signed now. But the joke is that if I owned it, it would be CGC .05. Like, I wouldn't have taken any care of it. Like, I wouldn't have thought. But I remember handing it to my best friend at the time and saying, this is a funny little parody of Frank Miller's, Japan obsession and Chris Claremont's overwrought, X-Men stuff, and it's very funny. But I also said, man, this is such a specific satire. I can't imagine anyone's going to read this thing. It's just a, jokey one-off. And, talking to Kevin about it now, he's like, yeah, that's exactly the intention of it. It was a jokey one-off. We had no idea. And then like 6 months later, people were like, where's the second issue? And he went, no, seriously? Are you kidding? I never watched the cartoons. I was 10 years too old for the cartoons when they came out. So when I do the Ragdolls comic book, I'm not even remotely influenced by the cartoons or even the movies. I'm influenced by the Mirage Studio era, first 10, 15 issues of the Turtles, because that was really all I read. I mean, you couldn't sort of avoid seeing the cartoons and seeing all the pop culture stuff out in the world. I feel like if I was 10 years younger, the comic book would be way more influenced by the animated series, and that's just not my world. That's not part of my brain.
Nice. That one first hit my radar in, I think it was 1988. I was going to my comic book store with my parents, and I picked it off the shelf, and it was the weirdest, coolest, most awesome thing I had ever read. And that was where my brain went with it, because I was way too young to know that it was a parody. I'm just like, oh, they're turtles.
Well,
and they're ninjas.
Yeah.
And it became my favorite book since Spider-Man.
Oh, that's excellent. I mean, that's clearly the part I missed, is that if you get none of the jokes, like if you get zero of the references, it's a book about turtles doing martial arts, and that's funny. Like, it doesn't matter if you know anything about Bruce Lee, anything about the X-Men or Alpha Flight or New Mutants, which it really, I think was more about when it started. Nothing about if you'd never read Frank Miller's Ronin or what he was doing in Daredevil at that time. And the thing that's funny is if you did read Daredevil, the satire, the pastiche is not subtle. I mean, the hand becomes the foot and stick becomes Splinter. I mean, that's not subtle stuff. That's pretty nail on the head stuff. Then again, I'm doing the same incredibly unsubtle work in Elvira, so I'm not one to throw stones about that.
It's cool. Yeah, Daredevil was another one I loved reading. I told you about that time I met Kevin Eastman, right?
Yes, you did. You did.
I think it was it was either 1989 or 1990 at the Penta, just before they renamed the hotel. And he was doing the Tundra Studios thing, and I got so starstruck. I came with an inch of fainting, and I was trying to be really cool, because Kevin Eastman was and it's still one of my idols. I met him and he was just this very nice, unassuming guy, and
yeah, totally.
I must have turned bright red, and then I turned white, and I started, and I thought I was being really cool, oh, I'm going to tell him about this this cool idea for a comic that I have, and maybe Tundra Studios can do it and all that stuff. And yeah, I got to none of it, and I was, oh my God, what he must have thought of me. I feel terrible.
He gets that so much, though. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, and he's so kind. I mean, one of the things that I love about, I've done a lot of signings sitting next to him, just kind of like, yeah, might as well. And when people walk up with, drawing blood or the rag dolls, I'm there so I can sign it. But he gives everyone the time of day. He makes eye contact. He listens to their stories because he knows how important this stuff is to them, because it was important to him. He knows how he felt, meeting Jack Kirby at one of his first cons as a professional, and what that must have meant to him. So it's very easy for him to project back, to how it must feel to be on the other side of the table. And I find that, that's true with a lot of creators. The more they're in touch with their inner fan, the kinder they are to fans. I was walking down, I was with a couple who are both comic book people, and I will not name them. We're not friends anymore, but we were hanging out at one San Diego con, and we were walking along the Bayside walkway behind the convention at night, and it was all the people camped out for Hall H. And one of them said something like, "Look at these fucking crazy, stupid," and I was like, "These people put food on your table, dude. Like, what's wrong with you?" Like, yeah, I wouldn't sleep outside for anything in Hall H. It's all on YouTube the next day. Like, but that feeling of being in the room and seeing the trailer for the new movie or whatever, if I was 20 years old, I might still be doing that. I might think about that, and for sure, I can't look down on it. I can't go, ugh, these crazy fucking people. It's like, no, they're enthusiastic about the thing you did, jackass, and let them be as excited as they are, or at least indulge their enthusiasm. I feel like there's nothing more kind of sad and deflating than being put off by someone else's enthusiasm for something they love, I
can't even imagine it.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I don't have to share anyone's enthusiasms, and no one has to share mine. One of the fanboy genes I don't have is, nothing George Lucas or CBS Studios does to any of my beloved franchises from when I was a kid. No one's stealing my childhood. You know what I mean? Sam Mendes has not come to my house to shred my Sean Connery DVDs. Like, he's making lame James Bond movies. That's fine. Like, that's none of my business. Like, I walked out of Spectre and turned to my wife and I was like, yeah, they can stop making these now if they want. Like, I'm good. I'm good. This isn't getting better. But then they hire a director I really like to do No Time to Die, and I'm like, woo, James Bond! I'm so excited. And it's like, I never learn. I remember being excited to see Octopussy when it came out, and I'm like, what was I even thinking about that? But
I don't know. Look at That Die was pretty good. That was one of my all-time favorite James Bond movies, and that was Roger Moore.
That was the first one I saw in a movie theater.
Really?
Like, new. I was, part of me goes like, is that really an appropriate movie for an 8-year-old kid?
In hindsight, yeah.
But, I mean, and the voodoo stuff in it scared the hell out of me. But I immediately was like, James Bond is it, man. Like, be that cool to go through the world dressed that well, And to this day, I still dress like James Bond, and I have no compunctions about that. A few years ago, long time ago actually, some friends of mine were like, let's go for a hike in the woods. And I was like, yeah, great. And I showed up, and the only thing I have that's like hiking clothes is like old military surplus clothes, like an old set of fatigues and a black commando sweater. And I show up to go hiking, combat boots. And my friends were like, we're not infiltrating Blofeld's volcano, dude. We're just going for a walk in the woods. I'm like, these are my casual outdoorsy clothes. I'm sorry. I have suits, I have tuxedos, and I have old fatigues, and I really don't have anything else.
Oh,
Anyway.
wow, that's awesome. I love James Bond as a kid. I understand how problematic a lot of it is right now, but I still love it. Yeah, the Fleming books. I think
Oh yeah.
I've seen every James Bond movie up until Casino Royale was the last one I saw. I think I've seen all of them at least twice. Some of them I've seen a lot more than that.
There are a handful of them I've seen like 40 times. I'm sure. I'm sure I've seen Goldfinger a crazy amount of times. I'm sure I've seen Diamonds Are Forever and You Only Live Twice. But again, it's also like art is about when you encounter it. And after Live and Let Die, a local movie theater had, I think I must have seen Live and Let Die when I was 7 or 8. And then for my 8th or 9th birthday, the local movie theater showed a double feature of Diamonds Are Forever and You Only Live Twice. So I didn't see those on television. I saw them on big screen for the first time. And I was sold from that point on. But I can't disconnect my love of those movies from seeing them with my father and my best friend on my birthday when I was 9 years old. Like there's no way it won't always give me that rush of pleasure, even the stuff in it that doesn't work, even the stuff that's bad. But I think Diamonds Are Forever in particular is a very underrated movie. I'm a guy that listens to director commentaries, especially when I was spending all my time being a filmmaker. The director is pretty hilarious on that commentary, and he has exactly the right, and this comes up in writing comic books, he has exactly the right attitude towards doing genre material that's just trope after trope after trope. There's a scene in that movie where Bond fights the two gymnasts who are guarding Willard White, two slim 25-year-old girls, and they beat the shit out of him. They're like, he has a very hard time overmastering them. And the director on the commentary, while Connery's walking up to the place, he's like, so in the script, Sean, there's some bodyguard who's some large man, and Sean tangles with him, and it's so boring. We've seen it and seen it. And I was watching the Olympics with my wife and watching all of these gymnasts, and I went, these women are terrifying. And that's what ended up in the movie. It's because he was watching the Olympics and went. And the other great fight scene in that movie is in a tiny glass elevator of the kind you see in Europe a lot. And it's because that was the elevator in the production designer's building was exactly like that. And while they were in prep, he turned to the producer and said, what if the fight with Peter Franks was in a room this small, like where you literally can't pull your arm back far enough to throw a punch without hitting the wall? Wouldn't that be interesting? And that's what's in the movie. And I think the holy grail of writing, especially action adventure stuff, but it's true of horror stuff or sci-fi stuff, is what's the scene nobody's seen before? Or what's the scene everybody's seen before, but we're going to do something to it and go, oh. And, as a writing thing, I always kind of love it when writers sort of pick up on, okay, this was a good thing. This was a really great thing. What's missing? What was unconvincing? What was a bad thing about it? And let me see if I can retool that. So at the end of Goldfinger, James Bond wins by sexually conquering the bad guy's female assistant. And then in Thunderball, he has sex with the bad girl, and when it's over, she says, yeah, I'm turning you over to Spectre, buddy. You were expecting something different to happen? Like, what's wrong with you? You're not that good. And I just kind of love that as a response to, yeah, that Goldfinger thing, that's not going to work in all these movies. We're not going to be able to pull that out. He's not going to be able to pull that rabbit out of the hat every single time. To bring it back to comic books, Alan Moore is a genius and Watchmen is a work of genius. Fine. But he is an Englishman writing about American culture, and he has absolutely no interest in race as a topic of American culture and history. So Watchmen has not a thought in its head about how race affects American culture. And the fact that Damon Lindelof went, so we're going to make a Watchmen TV series, and it's going to be almost entirely about race and how it affects American culture. And that's not disrespectful to Moore. That's looking at a work of art that people think is perfect and going, okay, but what did he miss? Or even if you don't want to look at it as what did he miss, it's what did he decide not to talk about? What did he ignore for whatever reasons? And I don't think looking at Watchmen, you go, oh, this really needs to be about race. Like he really missed something there. But in Lindelof's hands, you go, no, that was a really good thing to talk about when you're extrapolating about an alternative history and you don't take into account racism in America. You're not really paying attention. And as a writer, it behooves you to pay attention to the real world and let it, especially in science fiction, especially in superhero stuff. I mean, I always say that what's best about genre, what you could even argue, and I do on my web series Pulp Today quite a bit, I would argue is even superior about genre is that it's metaphors made concrete. It's, I always say it's, you can write something about a guy struggling with his demons, and what does it look like visually, and what does it feel like for the audience watching it? It's a guy sitting on a bar stool. It's a guy typing on a computer. It's a guy arguing with his girlfriend, whatever. In genre, he can actually be he can be struggling with demons. And, the reason we all love genre is that's how it really feels. You know what I mean? Like it feels bigger. And when you just make a movie that modern people walking around, if the 20th century literary novel was the only art we'd have, you would believe that the biggest problem in the world was sexual jealousy and people cheating on their wives or not cheating on their wives. Like that's like the topic is middle-aged men being unhappy, someone being in love with someone who doesn't love them back. Are those really the number one problems of humanity? You can deal with bigger things. There's an essay by, I'm spacing on his name, the writer who wrote Crash, Ballard, J.G. Ballard. There's an essay by Ballard, I think I read it as the forward to a paperback edition of Crash, where he actually even argues that, and of course he's being deliberately provocative, he argues that science fiction is the only valid form of literature. And the backup to his argument is that quote-unquote serious literature almost always portrays society as static, and society is never static. Over the course of The Great Gatsby, society doesn't change. And that's not a knock on The Great Gatsby, but it's not about the evolution of humanity. It's just about people the way they are. And he argues that it's a more interesting project to talk about, and a more valid project artistically, to do the what if we go this way, what if we go that way. And I'm not, like I said, I don't know that even J.G. Ballard believes that everything that's not science fiction is irrelevant. I think he was being deliberately provocative. I think he was pushing back on the people like Vonnegut, who wrote science fiction, and I don't write science fiction. I write serious novels that have time travelers in them. And the other version of that I think is truly fascinating and actually almost proves Ballard's point is Philip K. Dick, who in his early career, he wrote cheesy pulp science fiction novels. And he wrote serious quote-unquote novels that he was very invested in and felt very strongly about. And they're all kind of terrible. They're all kind of turgid and dull. I mean, I can't say I've read all of them, but I've read a handful of them, and they are not impressive as writing. And it's when he hit a point in his career where he went, why don't I write my serious novels of ideas but put robots and spaceships and time travel and other planets and aliens in them and try it that way? And when he does that, he becomes a genius making work that we're still talking about.
This goes sort of back to something you were talking about earlier with subverting expectations. Because what Philip K. Dick will do is he'll take a story and he'll tell it in a way where you think what's happening is very, very predictable. And then there comes a point in the story where everything gets turned on its head, and you're wondering, you don't know which way is up. And I think that's a mark of really effective writing.
Oh, yeah. As far as effective writing goes, I've read a lot of Stephen King. I've read a lot of horror literature. I have never been chilled. Like, there's a moment in The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch where the main character starts seeing the physical features, the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, appearing on other people who aren't Palmer Eldritch. And it literally sent a not metaphorical chill up my spine while I was reading it. I tend to have a certain amount of distance from it in terms of being viscerally engaged with it. Movies, for all of the tools that they have at their disposal, tend to engage me viscerally more than novels do. But I remember where I was sitting when I read that chapter and going, whoa, like, what is that? What is happening? And that, I mean, as someone who I don't write a lot of prose only stuff, but that is a trick, man. To be able to pull that off, that's some real talent and some real command of the form.
So I noticed on your YouTube channel, you're always doing these readings from really great books, and I am absolutely astounded by how much you've read. Well, what do you think your favorite book is, just in general?
Oh, I couldn't ever narrow that down to one book. I can say, like, there are books that I've enjoyed and read over and over again, and there are books that changed the way I think about myself and about the world, and those get special mention. And I can start pretentious with Albert Camus' The Fall. Changed the way I saw human behavior and my own behavior. Everybody talks about Gatsby, but Tender is the Night kind of was a roadmap to, this is how you set yourself up for failure all the time. This is romantically. This is how you get yourself in trouble. This is how you, and it's funny, I do this, I've been a guest on this podcast called Fuckboys of Lit, which is a woman named Emily Edwards, and she's hilarious, and it's a great show. It's basically just about horrible male behavior in classic literature. She had me on to talk about James Bond, which was fun, but she had me on to talk about Sam Spade. And I reread The Falcon, and I found a single sentence fragment in there that, like, I was like, man, I wish I'd noticed this 25 years ago. It would have possibly changed my behavior in my social life. Sam Spade has been sleeping with his partner's wife. And he clearly also maybe has something going on with his secretary. And the partner is killed. And the secretary says to him, why did you, like, you don't even like her. Why did you carry on with Archer's wife? And he says something like, I don't know. I've never really known, what to do with women aside from that. And not to denigrate myself, but it was kind of like I knew I had no other way of relating to women beyond sexualizing the relationship, even if it was just flirting, even if it was just, I'm not saying I went around seducing everyone I met. I certainly couldn't have gotten away with that. But just like there always had to be a flirty component. Like that's how I knew, that was the only way I knew of lowering someone's defenses so they would be my friend, believe it or not. And when I read that line, I was like, holy cow, that is really something. And there's also, aside from that, and I talk about it on my podcast, there's a 2-3 page thing in The Maltese Falcon that's literally the invention of existentialism called the Flitcraft story. And that rewrote my head a little bit when I read it. And Philip K. Dick's Valis, which I say maybe it may be the world's first autobiographical science fiction novel, because he had a schizophrenic breakdown in the early 70s, late 60s, I think it was. And when he had mostly recovered, I don't know if I would say 100% recovered, he wrote a book about it. And it's absolutely fascinating. And there is some stuff in there that I think about all the time and I quote all the time. He has a thing, the main character is in a mental hospital, and he's become obsessed with stuff that's in the Gnostic Gospels. And he's talking to his psychiatrist about the Gnostic Gospels. And at a certain point, even though he's a mental patient talking to a therapist, they get into this very heady discussion of the history and the philosophy of the early Gnostic Christians. And the psychiatrist says to him, well, you're the expert. And he says, hearing that, he says, there's a phrase that can be spoken by another person that can heal you mentally. And it takes an incredible healer to talk to you, listen to you, and figure out what that one sentence is that's going to hit the reset button and help you and heal you. And he says, what's horrible about the human condition is you have to be a genius healer to find that one sentence, But on the other hand, almost any idiot you meet can figure out the sentence that you could hear which will destroy you. I think that is an incredibly profound and mostly true thing. And I gotta say that since, not to take it as any kind of religious document, because I'm a deeply not religious person, but I keep that in mind when I talk to people. Like there's always sort of, not that I'm trying to go around healing people, but I'm like, what does this person need to hear about themselves? Like, what do they not hear enough? What will, and I'm looking to heal them for the next 5 minutes, not for the rest of their life. Like in the moment, it's a very different thing. But I just think it's an interesting way to approach human interactions. When I compliment people, a lot of times they're like, wow, thanks. And I'm like, we all go around the world thinking nice things about our fellow human being. And 99.9% of the time, we don't say it for a million reasons. Because a lot of times we think that complimenting someone makes us vulnerable to them, opens us up to them, gives them a power over us. It's like, oh, well, you didn't say it back, so I guess I'm not wonderful or beautiful or whatever. But if you give that freely, if you're willing to say the nice thing freely, it's kind of a freeing way to go through life. And not everything is appropriate and not everything is a thing that needs to be said, but I have found in my own sort of limited application of that if you think a nice thing about someone that they would probably like to hear about themselves, you know what, just say that shit out loud.
Absolutely. It's funny you should bring that up because, I realized about 6 months ago that, I had never really received a lot of compliments until fairly recently. And I really liked it. I mean, when people walk up to you and they say, wow, you are so pretty. Or, hey, you had a really amazing thought on that thing. It makes your day. One of the things I try to do on Twitter pretty regularly now is I just put out these tweets like, hey, you're beautiful and valid, and can I eat Cheetos off your butt? Or, something along those lines. Because I can't be totally serious with it, but,
No,
people have written in and told me, hey, that one tweet, you did really made my day. That's why I keep doing it, I think.
I consciously remember you doing one that was like, all the people I interact with are awesome. And I was just like, I interact with Eva, so I'm gonna take that. Like, I don't know that it has anything to do with me. I doubt very seriously I was the person upmost in their mind when they said that, but I will. I'll take it. I got no reason. I got no reason not to take that as a win and get on with my day.
Totally. And, for what it's worth, the people I interact with on Twitter are seriously the best people in the world. Smart, well-read, interesting. I am very, very lucky.
Yeah, I feel that way. People talk about Twitter being a cesspool, and there's a thing that I say about social media that I also say about the city I live in, Los Angeles. If you hate it, you should go check your preferences. Everything that people tell me they hate about Los Angeles, I'm like, you can choose to live in a neighborhood where that thing you hate about Los Angeles is true, or you could find the neighborhood where that's not true. It's like people say it's not a walkable city. I live in the middle of Hollywood. Me and my wife have one car. She's the one who tends to work out of the house, and I work in the house. I take public transportation all the time. I take the subway downtown and into the valley. I take the buses all over. I jump in a Lyft every now and again. I take those little Lime scooters sometimes, and it's like, and people are friendly. My father taught me early on. He was really kind to everybody. He was a guy that interacted with people and wanted to be friends with people and wanted to be friendly with people. And modeling his behavior has been it has been I feel like when I was a little kid, I had an inborn selfishness, and watching him kind of made me go, nah, it's actually, there's a sort of paradoxical circle of human interaction where the most selfish thing you can do is not be selfish, because it reaps rewards that are better than the rewards you get for being selfish. if that makes sense. The most self-interested thing you can do is be kind to other people. And this is just an example. In 1999, I made this web series, which was dumb because nobody even had broadband. So like 6,000 people in the country could watch it. But I was making this thing out of pocket. It was an adaptation of one of my dad's books. He had just died. It meant a lot to me. And I had heard that you could get makeup artists for free from the Hollywood Studio Makeup Academy on Gower. So I called them up and I said, hey, I got to shoot in a week. Can I have one of your students for free? I heard you guys do that. And they said, yes, we insist on you giving them credit and you feeding them. I said, of course, I'm going to give them credit and feed them. So a woman came out, worked as a makeup artist on my show. She was great. A week after that, I thought, I should write a thank you. I wrote a thank you card. I bought a box of, drugstore, what Jim Gaffigan calls gamble chocolates, little box, a little Whitman sampler or whatever the hell. And I walked in and knocked on the door and I said, hey, can't remember the guy's name, but is Mr. I think his name is Jim McBride. Is Jim McBride here? And they were like, yeah. And he came out and I said, hey, yeah, I'm David Avallone. I used one of your students last week on a shoot. And I just, here's a card and a box of chocolate that you can, split among your students. And he just stared at me like I was a crazy person. And I said, what? And he said, I've been operating this studio for 30 years. I have sent people out on literally 1,000 independent films. You are the first person to write a thank you card.
Nice.
And the thing is, though, I always say that is not a story about how awesome I am. That is a story about how shitty everybody else is. Like, to me, that is the bare minimum of acceptable human behavior. Someone worked for you for free. You did not pay them. You write them a thank you card. You buy them a $10 box of gamble chocolate. Like, that's the lowest possible. And particularly as a middle-aged white man in the early 21st century, I feel like all the time people toss flowers at my feet for behavior that is like, no, really, like that's literally the least I could have possibly done. Like, I couldn't have done less than that. I this close to phoning in an act of kindness, and people are like, wow. And I'm like, oh my God, white men set the bar so low for me.
What that reminds me of? Back in 2006, I think, I dated this one gal, and her name was Becky, and she was probably the second most brilliant social hacker I think that I've ever met. I mean, she could get in touch with absolutely anybody. And the way she would do it would be by calling up just a random person that she wanted to get in touch with and getting to their people or whatever. Then after the call, she would go to the store and buy like 20 chocolate bars and a vase, and she would make these bouquets of candy to send these people with a thank you note. Hey, thanks for taking my call. It could be something really, really minor. And that got her in touch with, I mean, my jaw dropped when I saw her contact list on her phone. It was absolutely incredible. People really respond to that kind of attention, I think.
They really do. And, I'm relatively new to the comic book industry. I only started writing comics in 2014, so 6 years. And man, do I recommend taking on a completely new art form and a completely new community in middle age, because it was totally invigorating. And I didn't, for 100 reasons, I didn't half-ass it. I was like, okay, I've never written a comic book. I've read 1,000 of them, but I bought all the books on writing comic books. And I'll tell you, there's about 10% of good information in most of those books, and the rest of it is repetition because there's only so much you can say on the subject. But I'm so glad I read all of it, and I reached out to people and I asked questions. And since becoming a part of this community, I try to be a friend to my fellow creators. Like right now, I'm involved with 2 Kickstarters, and a handful of friends of mine all have their own Kickstarters, and I support them and I retweet their links and I tell everybody how great their work is. And I'm not lying. Their work is great. The people that I run with are an incredibly talented bunch, and there's a great joy in being supportive to good people whose work you admire. The other day, someone who I don't know really at all, I think I might have said something about having a down day or whatever on Twitter, and some complete stranger sent me a DM. They're like, "You are so positive, and you are such a supportive person of other people, and you deserve to hear nice things about you," which was, an echo of what I say all the time. And,
Nice.
and it was just like, man, I'm really glad, I can't judge myself. I'm really glad that to a complete stranger who doesn't know me and doesn't really know my friends, like I'm glad that's how it looks. I'm glad that's what I project, that it's a rah, rah, go comics, kind of a thing. And I was at the last con I did was Long Beach Comic Expo in January of this year, and I shouldn't say a panel, it was just me. I gave a talk at the Creator Conference, which starts off the con, about networking, and sort of my main thing was, just like film, just like anything else, it's a community, and it really is a case of ask not what comics can do for you, ask what you can do for comics. If you're of service, if you're supportive, if you support your friends in your work, it does kind of come back to you. And aside from that, it is an extraordinarily pleasant experience, and it makes the experience of being in comics really pleasant.
So I think we talked about Kickstarters before, the Kickstarters that you're involved in, and you were just mentioning that you have some friends who have some really amazing Kickstarters right now. If I wanted to read a Kickstarter comic right now, just in general, what's hot?
I will be self-interested and say that the thing that I wrote that's kickstarting right now, called Elvira the Omega Ma'am, which is a Elvira comic that's sort of a parody. That's kind of a satire, let's say, of the last year of our lives, which is a tricky thing to make jokes about, but I did my best. And it does star Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. A wonderful person to work with, and a really fun character to write and to speak in that voice and all of that. There is like a 90-year-old vaudeville comic inside me, and predictably, if I back off the cheapest, cheesiest joke in the world, the only note I'll get from Cassandra / Elvira is, "No, go for it." Tell the cheesy, low-hanging joke. That's the brand. Do it. But yeah, it's sort of a Elvira. We're all in quarantine and we can't go out, so she's trying to fix up her hair and has an overdose of hairspray, goes into a coma, wakes up several months later to discover that Los Angeles has been overrun by orange-skinned, pale-eyed, deranged zombies. And she discovers that they're zombies because a certain influential public figure convinced them to ingest a cleaning product, and the cleaning product interacted with the COVID and turned them into zombies.
There's no social commentary there.
No social. I'm very lucky that Cassandra shares my politics 100%, so she's always completely on board with making fun of orange-skinned, red-hatted zombies. So that's fun. I'm also part of this anthology called Nightmare Theater, and it's 225 pages, and the longest story is 8 pages long. And I did an 8-page story for it. There's maybe 30 other artistic teams in it. They're all really great independent creators, and I recommend that highly. That's going to be an incredible value. My friend Ryland, who does kind of like dark action stuff, has a thing out called The Peacemakers, which is brand new as of Monday. My piece for the Nightmare Theater anthology is literally a project that I've wanted to do since I was old enough to understand my childhood at all. My dad, was this World War II veteran who wrote pulp fiction for a living. And I didn't realize until I got older that everyone's parents didn't do this. When he told me the classic fairy tales, this is a completely true story. When he told me the classic fairy tales, which are, set in northwestern Europe, mostly, he made them about his own World War II experiences, and he and his squad figure prominently He was a sergeant in what was still called the United States Cavalry. He drove around Europe in this little tiny toy tank called an M8 armored car. And I know the names of the guys in his platoon: Zisk, Skiviot, and George Long. I don't think I even know Skiviot. I don't think anyone ever knew Skiviot's first name. But every fairy tale you've ever heard of, and some that he made up just for when he ran out of Grimm's fairy tales, and they were all delivered to me in this sort of inappropriate 1950s hard-boiled private eye delivery. Like, he didn't tell them, like, once upon a time in a forest across the sea. It was always like, so, Belgium, 1945, my platoon pulled into a small town and there was a chick in a glass box. No one could wake her up. You know what I'm saying? It was crazy. Some Nazi had put a spell on her. So like they're crazy stories, but they were so compelling to me as a child, and I still remember a lot of them. So years ago, I started working on a script for it as a feature film, starting with the Little Red Riding Hood story. When I was offered doing this anthology, I went, this would be a great opportunity to do an 8-page pilot presentation. Like, what would the prelude be? So I decided to do a Hansel and Gretel story that is a prelude to the Little Red Riding Hood story. My wife is responsible for the darkest joke in it, which I go back and forth on cutting out. You know the Hansel and Gretel story, right? What's the witch doing with Hansel and Gretel? She's literally putting them in an oven. So when Sergeant Michael Avallone kicks open the door and sees the two kids on the baking tray and the open oven doors and the witch, he says, "What the hell is it with you people and stuffing kids in ovens? Jesus!" Which is
keep that in.
That is a jet black joke, but it's like, look, the guy probably liberated a concentration camp a week ago. It would be malpractice to not have him make a comment on all the ovens he's been seeing that week. Every once in a while I look at that page and I'm like, oh, that line's a gut punch. I don't know how I can leave that into my relatively lighthearted horror story.
It's funny if it means the perpetrators of the crimes rather than the victim,
right,
which is what you're doing.
Exactly.
So I don't think there's a problem with that one.
No, absolutely. The butt of the joke is the average German citizen who is thinking it's okay to shove children in ovens. Like, the joke is definitely not. The joke is definitely not on the kids. And little Gretel saves the day by kicking some, cooking oil into the witch's eyes while Sergeant Mike draws his Colt 45 on her. So it's definitely it's definitely on the side of the angels, but it's it's the whole punching up, punching down thing. I'm Jewish. I've heard, it's springtime for Hitler. I've heard, jokes about Nazism and the Holocaust my entire life from relatives who survived, from all of that. So it's not, I know it's in the grand tradition of that, but I know that, there are people who are not Jewish and people who are not related who will just look at that and go, oh my God, that's so tasteless in your little kid's story, to put that in. But those stories are nightmare horror stories to begin with. In Cinderella, don't the stepsisters like literally hack their feet to bits trying to fit them into the shoes? Like, there's just a lot of really raw stuff in those stories. So I'm really reflecting. I mean, and it is a story, like, I'm commenting on the fact that European culture has had a fairy tale about a witch shoving kids in an oven literally since, the 10th century, the 5th century. I have no idea when those stories are from. But it's, and that's a story we tell children. We tell children a story about a wolf swallowing a grandmother whole, and like, yeah, that's fine. That's cool, whatever. But yeah, so that's a really fun thing, and I don't know if I may try and find a publisher for the overall story. That episode is called German Chocolate. I don't know what I'm calling the series yet. My father's war memoir, which doesn't have any of that in it, it's his serious war memoir, has this really beautiful apocalyptic title called All Except Six. He was great with titles. And I asked him about it once, and he said it's a little piece of really dark GI, I don't know if even humor is the word, but when you'd say, fuck 'em all, when anyone would say fuck 'em all, the response is all except six. We're going to need those for pallbearers. That is some dark, shit right there. But I'm probably gonna give it a more whimsical title, like, The Secret War Diary of Sergeant Michelangelo Avallone, or something like that, or the fairy tales, Fairy Tales of the 20th Armored Division, 3rd Army, United States Cavalry. Fairy Tales of the 3rd Army has got a kind of, or at least Fairy Tales of the 20th Armored Division, 3rd Army E Company, or whatever, is probably a funnier, lighter title that sort of expresses the whole. I tell people it's The Princess Bride meets Saving Private Ryan, because that's essential. Even though you don't see the scene of my father telling me the story, that's the invisible frame around it. The stories are narrated by him, telling bedtime stories. So I do not appear in it as a 5-year-old boy or anything like that. And I should mention the team on it. I don't know how the hell I was able to convince her, but Silvia Califano, this incredible artist, Italian artist, who does the really great work for IDW on their original Star Trek season. I think it's season 5 is the series that they're doing right now. And she's really great with likenesses, and she's really great with. I didn't hire her for this reason, but I really like to work on Star Trek, and she had done some sketches for a series with Dynamite that never quite got off the ground, but I really thought the sketches were great, so she stayed in my mind. And after I hired her, I was like, I really want the main character to look like my dad did when he was 19, 20 years old. So I laid a ton of photographs on her. It's a very emotional thing for me in this goofy little 8-page story to see my 19-year-old father as a comic book hero, because that's exactly the image I had of him when I was a little boy. And he's been dead 20 years, and to see him young and full of life, and to be writing in his voice, which I know so well and can imitate, with no humility. I imitate his voice very, very, very well. So it's really quite a thing. But I was going to say, the reason it's funny that Sylvia is so perfect for this, because on Star Trek, I know that as far as IDW is concerned, and as far as the fans are concerned, the likenesses and getting the technology and the gear right is integral to that. If she drew a phaser that looked wrong, or a transporter pad that didn't look like it looked on the show, she'd get a note to go back and fix it. So it's nice working with an artist who doesn't mind when I say he should be carrying an MP40 machine gun, and here's a piece of photo reference for that, and she'll draw it to look exactly like that. Because you want to work with the people that you know. The first person I approached was my good friend Dave Acosta, who draws almost everything that I've written for Dynamite. At least he drew all the Elvira, he drew not Betty, he drew Elvira, he drew the Doc Savage thing, the Shadow thing. We have a great working relationship. And I sent him the script, and I sent him the photo reference, and he was like, I've thought about it, and I don't want to draw tanks, man. And I was like, and Sylvia, because she spends so much time drawing shuttlecraft and Klingon warships and the Enterprise and all that, she's like, drawing a tank is not like some annoying piece of photo reference she has to get right. Every single panel on that Star Trek comic is a piece of reference that has to be just right. It's easy. I'm making her life much easier. So that's kind of a surprise benefit. But she's great. She's been a delight to work with. And if it goes to series anywhere, I really hope to hang on to her. Colorist is Ellie Wright, who did the colors on Betty Page and has a really nice. Betty Page is kind of a fanciful story that takes place in the real world, and you have to make the real world look very real, at least for my feeling. In order for the fantasy to work in the Betty Page stories, in order for the science fiction elements to work, I want the realistic elements to look as realistic as humanly possible. And Ellie really brings that. And Taylor Esposito is the letterer, and he has lettered like 99% of my comic book output. I can't remember the last time. Like, I think the last time I wrote a comic that Taylor didn't letter was maybe 3 years ago.
The bits in that Betty Page book are just hilarious.
Oh, thank you.
I'm remembering specifically the one that just made me laugh out loud was the one about space commies. In the second, it was like in the
Oh yeah,
second
yeah.
chapter of that first book, and
Invasion
you
of the
know,
Invasion of the Space Commies.
oh,
Or
it
what?
was
She was
so
yeah.
much fun.
It's Invasion of the Space Commies, and she was Queen of the Space Commies.
There was
I
this
wa-
one line in there where the military sergeant says to her, "I don't know if I want to punch you or kiss you," and that was really
yeah, no, I mean
it was
Betty
it was
Page is my tribute to all 1950s, pop culture art that I love. After that first 4-issue arc, she leaves Los Angeles on her way back to, or on her way to a secret training base in the desert because she gets offered a job as a secret agent. And while she's at the base, it's attacked by giant scorpions. Talk about like going a long way for a really stupid joke. One of my favorite movies, and I'm not being ironic, it's a great movie. It's a beautifully constructed horror movie. And I always tell people Aliens is a crypto remake of it, which is Them, exclamation point, which is the movie about the giant ants. Go watch Them sometime with aliens in your head, and the little girl who's like the sole survivor, who's the only one that's seen the monsters. There's a lot of stuff Cameron lifted from that. But so the title of the issue with the giant scorpions is Those, exclamation point. And
nice.
a big part of comic book, one of the first things I learned about comic book writing, and I'm obsessed with it, is the primacy of the page turn. That every right hand even numbered odd numbered page, every right hand odd numbered page is the setup or the suspense beat, and every even page turn is the payoff. You don't really have to do it every page. Sometimes you can't make the timing work out. But 7 pages, I should say, into that comic, Betty is in a Jeep with her boss, Captain McKnight, and she looks off screen and she says, "What are?" And you turn the page and it's the giant scorpion, and she's saying, "Those." And it's so childish that I wrote an entire comic book so I could have that moment. But it makes me super crazy happy, I gotta say. And there's did you ever see the Coen Brothers movie Hail Caesar?
No, I didn't.
There's a pair of attractive movie stars in that. Hobie Doyle, and I'm trying to remember the woman's name now off the Vasquez. I think her name is Vasquez. When the scene goes badly in issue 2, when they're making Invasion of the Space Commies, the director says, "Oh, I should have taken that Doyle Vasquez picture over at Capitol." It's a little Coen Brothers hat tip. And I let that your whole comic can't be nothing but that over and over again, but it's fun to put in those little nods to all the stuff that you love. It especially, I think, is important if you're lifting or referencing heavily from those things. You have to acknowledge, yeah, I know. There's an episode of Deep Space Nine that's a remake of the John Ford movie The Searchers. Gul Dukat finds out his daughter has been raised by the Klingons, and he goes on a rescue mission with Major Kira, but he wants to kill her because the Klingons have ruined her, which is the plot of The Searchers. And I'm watching the episode thinking, well, this is cheesy. This is just a remake of The Searchers. John Wayne's running line in The Searchers is, "That'll be the day." And they're flying towards the Klingon colony, and Gul Dukat, am I getting the wrong Cardassian? Anyway, the Cardassian says, "If you want, I can take over the controls of the shuttle for a minute." And Major Kira goes, "That'll be the day." And I went, okay, thank you for, because what that says to me is we're not trying to get away with it. We're not trying to pull a fast one on you and say we came up with this plot all by ourselves. Yes, we know it's The Searchers. Now you know that we know, and we can forget thinking about that 50-year-old movie and concentrate on what's before us. And I love little gestures like that. I always feel like, I said this one of my most unpopular pop culture opinions is I'm not a fan of Tarantino. Because to me, it's mostly remixing and not, it's a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox. And I think that by the time I get to a Tarantino movie, it's faded too much for me to enjoy it. The pithy thing I said about him the other day on Twitter is I feel like his movies are movie trivia contests, And what you get for winning is that you can't enjoy the movie. Like your reward for getting all the references is, oh, this is weak and lame. Like that's your reward. No, his movies can be very entertaining. I think he's very talented, but he's one of those people who doesn't know his A material from his Z material. Mm-hmm. And his movies swing from being brilliant to being god awful in a heartbeat. And I haven't seen one yet that was brilliant from fade in to fade out, and I eventually got tired. Perfect example, Inglourious Bastard, World War II movie, opens in occupied France, 1940, 1941, I can't remember what. The music over the opening credits, I kid you not, is a piece of music called The Green Fields of Autumn. It is a beautiful, haunting piece of movie soundtrack music. It is the love theme from John Wayne's movie about the Alamo. The Alamo, Texas, 1854, the War of Texas Independence from Mexico. I don't want to be. Why would you make me think about that when you're trying to get me in the mood for France in 1940? You're literally betting that the audience doesn't know that you're borrowing this music from another, and also that's a terrible movie. It's got a gorgeous musical score by Dmitri Tiomkin, but it's a terrible movie. And I was just watching the opening credits going, why would you do that? And the other thing that offends me, just as someone who used to make films and still does, my favorite part of of making a movie, literally the easiest part, the best part, the most fun part, the part that's pure joy, is working with the composer. And when he made Inglourious Bastards, and Ennio Morricone was alive, and he tracks it with a lot of Ennio Morricone music from old movies, and I'm like, or you could pick up the phone and call Ennio Morricone, and he could write you some new shit. Like, my God, why would you rob yourself of the experience of having one of the brilliant film composers create something that's yours? You didn't borrow it from someone else. It's not Kill Bill has all these needle drops from Sergio Leone westerns. It's like, call Ennio. He's sitting by the phone. You have the money in the budget to call Ennio and say, I want to. And the other thing about Ennio specifically, Ennio will rip himself off in a heartbeat, and not, Ennio's not a guy who's going to tell you, I don't want to do something that sounds like my Sergio Leone music. The other side of that, and this is a complete tangent, but I love this story. You've seen The Incredibles, Brad Bird's The Incredibles?
Yes, I have. Several times, actually.
Yeah. Has an amazing score by Michael Giacchino. I love it in spite of the fact that I can tell you what the temp score was. I can tell you where he said, and it's about 80% John Barry and about 20% Henry Mancini. Mostly it's Bond scores. But they're charmingly reworked, and he never imitates the melody of the original score. He uses the same orchestration and tempo and feeling. So it's not like, oh, this is just a ripoff of that other thing. It's like, oh, this is in that vein of that other thing. And it gives me that 1960s James Bond feeling without it just being Austin Powers, without it just being a joke.
Right, and the cool thing about that is that when you think back to that music, that movie is going to be the first thing you think of, rather than thinking back specifically. Do you think when Tarantino does that, though, that he has something artistic and he's trying to stay there, or is he just being lazy?
I don't think lazy is the right word. I think it's that we're all of us, and this is true of every artist at every stage of their career, we're all trying to recreate the thing we loved when we were kids. I mean, I'm literally doing a 40-page comic book with Elvira starring in my favorite Charlton Heston science fiction movie. And it doesn't follow the plot of The Omega Man, which again is the difference between me and Tarantino. Like, there aren't scenes in The Omega Man that are really equivalent to the scenes in The Omega Man. It's just a vibe and a feeling and a bunch of inside jokes. I think Tarantino is a kid in his living room with a bunch of VHS tapes showing you his scenes from his favorite movies. but he's not changing them enough for me. And to go back to The Searchers as the example, like literally no one with a background in film history can watch Star Wars and not catch the burning homestead in Star Wars is the burning homestead from John Ford's The Searchers. But it's not in a Western. It's in a science fiction movie. I was talking about this the other day. The assault on the Death Star at the end was literally constructed. It's a remake of a scene from two similar scenes from two British World War II movies about British attempts to destroy dams in the Ruhr Valley, which were Germany's industrial center. And if you blew up these dams, they'd flood the factories and it would cripple the German war effort. And there's the trench approach. The dams were heavily fortified and you could only blow them up. They built this bouncing bomb and you had to fly really low over the water, drop the bomb at just the right moment so that it would bounce into the side of the dam and blow it up. You couldn't blow it up by dropping a bomb from the top. That's the Death Star run. But it's a World War II movie. If Tarantino, there wouldn't be that extra. I mean, and the best in the Inglourious Bastards, there's a scene where Brad Pitt has all of his men lined up and he's marching around them and barking orders at them and telling them, I want scalps. The Dirty Dozen has that same scene in it. But The Dirty Dozen is a World War II commando movie. That's what I'm talking about. If you're going to recreate the scene from The Dirty Dozen, do it in a Western, do it in a gangster movie, do it in anything but another World War II. Not the thing that's changed is Brad Pitt is shorter than Lee Marvin and he curses more. That's your twist. Your twist is that it's not Lee Marvin and he's cursing. Oh, and so I didn't finish the thing about The Incredibles that I found out. This is a story about the production that I just thought was interesting. John Barry was alive, and Brad Bird went to John Barry and he hired him, and Barry said yes, and they got together, and he said, I want it to have that same jazz orchestra sound from Goldfinger, and Barry said, that's great. I'm not 35 anymore. And I don't make that kind of music anymore. He said there are a number of talented composers out there whose entire thing is reworking the sound that I was very fond of in the 60s. He said, I just wouldn't be capable of, I can't be 35 for you again, scoring James Bond movies. I can't do it. And he picked Michael Giacchino, who has literally made a career out of doing that. He did a great reworking of Lalo Schifrin's Mission Impossible music for Mission Impossible 3. He reworked John Williams. I think he's the score for Rogue One, right? I can't remember if he's one of the two. I think he's Rogue One is his Star Wars movie. And his James Bond movie music for Incredibles is fantastic. But it doesn't sound exactly the same. And I just love that John Barry knew himself well enough to say, what I am going to turn in will not sound like the music I made when I was 35, living in London, 2 ex-wives ago, whatever. It's just, I can't be that guy. And there are people now making a really good living. George Clinton, who does the Austin Powers movies, does an incredible impression of John Barry. Every once in a while, he does a note-for-note impression for the purpose of a joke. There's a joke in one of the Austin Powers movies that I swear is, people have this idea about musical copyright that it's like X number of notes. And I don't know that that's true. But there's a moment in The Spy Who Shagged Me where he plays the theme from You Only Live Twice, and he literally just drops off the last note. He goes da 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 and then stops. That's not really how copyright works, but that's super funny that you're like, yeah, we can use exactly this much of the theme from You Only Live Twice before we get in trouble. But anyway, all this is turned into just a big conversation about creativity. But we all synthesize the stuff we love into our work, and the question becomes, what do you have to bring to it that's new? What did it tell you that you can then tell back that makes it worthwhile? I wrote a shadow story that was a crossover with the Twilight Zone. And that was a huge challenge because I don't know how familiar you are with the Shadow. He on the family tree, he's the guy between Zorro and Batman.
Right.
And the Shadow, when they pitched it to me, I was like, well, but the Shadow is kind of the Twilight Zone as a person. The Shadow encounters people and judges them, makes them face who they are inside. And either they change and join his crusade for justice, or he literally fills them full of 45 caliber bullets. He's more implacable than Batman, and he's more violent than Batman. And, I'm not saying this was some genius thing, but I was like, okay, so since the Twilight Zone sucks people up and teaches them a lesson and then deposits them back in their lives to sort of, it either traps them for all eternity in a hell of their own making, or they are deposited back in their lives having been changed by the experience, the lesson they learned. So my challenge was, what the hell can you... The Shadow is, literally, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows. What can you teach that guy? Looking at the long history of it and looking at the brutal violence that he dispenses to criminals, I went, what you can teach the Shadow is mercy. And there's a moment in the third issue where someone says to him, there is no justice without mercy. And that he kind of, has I never looked at it that way. And here's a perfect example of taking something from another source and reworking it. Do you know there's a Franz Kafka story called In the Penal Colony? I don't know if you've ever read it. So, so there's the machine that writes the name of your sentence on you and kills you while it's doing it. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about justice and mercy and all of that. And because it's the Twilight Zone and you have to come up with twisty, mind-bending things, my thing was that the Shadow keeps finding himself inhabiting other personas. Unlike Batman, the Shadow isn't really Lamont Cranston. That's his millionaire. Lamont Cranston is a millionaire, and he occasionally they look a little bit alike. And sometimes he shows up at Lamont Cranston's house and says, I'm putting on your tuxedo and going out with your girlfriend so I can infiltrate this ball and fuck you. That's what's happening tonight. And Lamont puts up with it. So in the first issue, he finds himself in Lamont Cranston's body. And he kind of sees how poorly he treats Lamont and his girlfriend. In the second episode, I go super meta, and he wakes up in the body of Orson Welles, who is about to record an episode of a Shadow radio show. So he sees a world in which he's a fictional construct. And in the third issue, we go even further back, and he wakes up in the body of the man who has been hired to write the very first Shadow pulp magazine. And I did a kind of Cronenberg, William Burroughs meets Kafka thing, where the Shadow, as the writer, gets sucked into a blank sheet of paper. And the Kafka element is, while he's standing there, giant typewriter keys come down from the quote-unquote sky and are typing the word justice. And they keep just missing him. And the E kind of obliterates him, and he finds himself in another body in the next issue. But I don't know that without being told that, you would connect the giant typewriter keys spelling out the word justice on a sheet of paper that our hero is trapped on, the size of a bug. I don't know that you'd go, oh, that's obviously a reference to Franz Kafka's In the Penal Colony. But it is. But when I was flipping through, what are mind-bending things I can do to the Shadow that will teach him a lesson, somewhere in that I thought of Cronenberg's Naked Lunch and typewriters coming to life, and I thought of Kafka's In the Penal Colony and having your sentence written out on you and all that. And far be it from me to say that's the right way to do literary references, but I feel like that's a more interesting approach than, for example, if I could have easily found an issue I could have made that issue of the comic book mirror the first issue of the Shadow pulp magazine. And that would have given me a framework, and I could have worked with it. But I decided to mix in Kafka to the pulp magazine idea. And, again, I don't think one reader in a million spotted that, but it doesn't matter. I'm not there trying to impress them with the Franz Kafka reference. I'm there using a vivid image that I've read in a book and reapplying it in an interesting way, I hope.
which is sort of like the Star Wars Death Star scene you were talking about.
Yeah.
I remember watching both of those movies because I didn't know that they had taken the footage from that earlier film and they recolored it. The coloring is very, very different. Believe it or not, Star Wars is actually not the only movie where that footage pops up. It's shown up in a couple of 1980s Commando movies. It's shown up in other science fiction movies. It's fun to see that. But Star Wars, I think, is the most high-profile example.
Yeah, when you're in the edit room and you need to, like, and the special effects aren't done yet, you slug stuff in so that the effects artists go, oh, they want a shot that looks like that, but instead of with a Lancaster bomber, instead of 3 Lancaster bombers, it's 3 X-wing fighters. Got it. And I've done that myself. I edited a terrible science fiction movie called Star Force. It took them forever to do special effects, and there were a couple of space dog fights in it. And this was like the late 90s. I bought cheap VHS copies of all the Star Wars movies. I digitized all of the space combat footage, and I found the shots I needed. And I cut it together, and I said, so obviously replace the X-Wings and the Y-Wings and the TIE fighters with our models, but this is the direction the ship should be flying. This is the speed. This is the feeling we're going for. And people, you do that stuff all the time. It's a great shorthand. But again, it's about, you don't want to create something that people just, I had seen those World War II movies when I was a kid. It didn't occur to me in 1977 watching Star Wars for the first time. I didn't connect it to 633 Squadron or the Dam Busters. Like it didn't jump out at me in an intrusive way.
So it's almost like what you would rather see is a remixing rather than a retelling. When it comes to creative elements.
It's more like, show me what this inspired you to do, not how cool this was. Like, be inspired by the thing rather than just go, here's the thing that I like. Here is that thing that I like. I mean, my favorite example is in Pulp Fiction. He does a little bit of a remake. A lot of it is from 1970s crime movies, and I appreciate that. But the whole getting rid of the dead body scene, La Femme Nikita had only come out like a year and a half earlier. And not only did he repeat the getting rid of the body scene a little, like, it's not note for note, it is a different scene, but he hired the actor from the American remake of La Femme Nikita who played the Jean Reno character in, what was it called, Point of No Return. Like, literally, Harvey Keitel plays that part in the American remake of La Femme Nikita. And then Tarantino's like, yeah, you should play the guy. You should play the guy that's based on the character from La Femme. And the other side of that is always the joke that's really good. I don't know if you watched Mad Men.
I did.
Okay, so the boss at the company was played by Robert Morse. The thing that Robert Morse is most famous for is being the star on Broadway and in movies of a fun musical called How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, that is absolutely about the Mad Men era and about that kind of office politics and the sexism of the time. Not that it's critical of it. There's literally a song in it called The Secretary Is Not a Toy. But again, it's that same gesture as the Deep Space Nine thing. When I saw that character on Mad Men, I went, oh, what a sweet, it's a beautiful little echo of How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. I'm connecting, the creator of the show is connecting Mad Men culturally to comedies about workplace politics and business from the period Mad Men takes place. I love those echoes. There's a bad Merchant Ivory movie called Jefferson in Paris, and Thomas Jefferson's daughter in the movie is played by Gwyneth Paltrow. Gwyneth Paltrow's mother is Blythe Danner, who played Thomas Jefferson's wife in the old musical movie 1776. That's an echo. That's not a ripoff. We want you to sort of vaguely be reminded in the back of your mind. We want you to look at this young woman, connect her to Blythe Danner and go, oh yeah, right, Blythe Danner, Tom Jefferson's wife, sure. Jamie Lee Curtis is a fine actress and very, very beautiful and should be in movies. But I guarantee you John Carpenter put her in Halloween because she is the daughter of the star of Psycho. And he was reinventing the genre that Psycho created. And it's a beautiful little gesture to go, and here's Marion Crane's grown-up daughter. Here's the daughter of the girl that got chopped up in the shower at Psycho, also being chased around by a dude with a knife. I took my dad to see Halloween, and he said in the end credits, he said, that girl looked like Janet Leigh. What's her name? And I said, Jamie Lee Curtis. And he said, well, Janet Leigh is married to Tony Curtis, so I'm going to go ahead and say Jamie Lee Curtis is their daughter. I think that's a pretty obvious conclusion to jump to.
I think you've shown me a completely new way to experience movies here. But everything you've said so far really makes sense on just sort of recognizing the fact that, we're all, rebuilding things that we love. I think that's a resonating message.
And that's exactly it. It's about creating. There's a line about it in Cronenberg's version of Naked Lunch. It's about mythic resonance. Halloween would be a great movie with any number of fine leading actresses in it. If that was Nancy Allen, who probably read for it, if it was Carrie Fisher, who probably read for it, be a great movie. But it wouldn't have mythic resonance where you'd go, right. And speaking of mythic resonance, this is one of the reasons kids like Carrie Fisher in Star Wars visually resembles Olivia de Havilland in The Adventures of Robin Hood, which Star Wars is definitely tonally connected to. Her costume looks that way, and she's a teeny tiny little brunette with a little upturned nose and rosy cheeks and big eyes. She actually looks a great deal like my wife, which is a wonderful thing. And also, she's Debbie Reynolds' daughter. So you want someone who's been royalty her whole life and isn't faking it? Someone who grew up with extraordinarily rich parents? George hired an actual princess. A princess of Hollywood, but an actual princess. And, that stuff, say what you will about it, it absolutely works. And, the story about how Harrison Ford got cast in Star Wars. He had done American Graffiti with George Lucas. And Lucas is making Star Wars, and Ford says, hey, you're making a new movie, great, is there anything for me? And Lucas says, no, I don't want anybody from American Graffiti. I want a completely new cast. And then he calls up Harrison Ford, and insult to injury, he says, I want you to come in and read with the other actors. I'll pay, whatever you pay, $10 an hour or whatever. Come in, and, I'm using a lot of unknowns and newcomers, and I want a more experienced actor to read with them. But you can't be in the movie. Now, Lucas has told him that no one from American Graffiti is going to be in the movie. Who walks in the door to read for Princess Leia but Cindy Williams, the star of American Graffiti? And I think the lead singer of Terry Bozzio, lead singer of Missing Persons? Or was it the one from Berlin? A bunch of not very good, not accomplished actresses came in to read for this. Harrison Ford is probably making minimum wage. He's working as a carpenter. His job has gone nowhere. So and you can find these videos online. They videotaped all of the auditions. So he's sitting here with a bunch of noobs. He can't get a job to save his life. And guess what? That's a really great way to play Han Solo. And everybody who watches the tape keeps telling George, this super handsome, cynical, tired guy is really electric. And you can see, there's one where he's with a rock star actress who can't act her way out of a brown paper bag. And, his back is to her. I think they're faking being in the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon or something. And his face is to the camera. And he's just rolling his eyes, I'm not in this for your rebellion, princess. I'm not in it for you. I expect to be well paid. He's very bored and unhappy about the entire experience. And after a certain period, George Lucas, too many people had told him, no, Han Solo is this angry, tired young man.
Okay, so the question I have for you there, though, is was that an accident? Was that just because, George Lucas was clueless? Or was he intentionally just fucking with him the whole time to get the best out of him?
No, I think that was sheer cluelessness. I don't think George is that psychologically adept that he realized what he was doing. But I can tell you a story that I do think is intentional. Have you ever seen Bridge on the River Kwai? Speaking of actors from Star Wars.
No, I haven't, but
Okay.
I've heard of it. I'm aware that it exists. I just haven't.
Sir Alec Guinness is in it. He plays I don't think he was a sir yet. He plays a colonel in the British Army who is in command of a group of POWs who the Japanese want to use to build a bridge in the middle of the jungle. By the Geneva Convention, you can't make prisoners of war do construction. He engages in a battle of wills with the Japanese camp commander. The thing is that, I mean, if you know Alec Guinness's work, he's kind of a soft guy. He's a great actor. He's interesting, but you don't think of him as like tough as nails. He flies into the horrible Burma location where they're shooting this movie. He's getting off the plane, literally stepping off the plane. And David Lean walks up to him and says, "Hey, Alec, welcome to Burma and whatever." And he says, "Man, I really wanted Olivier for this part, but he turned it down." And the story goes that for the whole movie, Alec Guinness was deeply offended and enraged. And so for the whole movie, they'll do a take where he's walking into the colonel's office and he yells out, "Hey, Alec, can you come through the door a little faster on the second take?" And Alec is like, "Why didn't you phone Sir Lawrence in London and tell him to come through the door a little faster? I will go through the door at the speed I damn well please." So he stiffened Guinness's spine by making him super angry. And you can absolutely interpret that story as David Lean is just an asshole and was being incredibly insensitive. But because of the kind of actor Alec Guinness is, I absolutely think David Lean went, how do I get Alec Guinness, sweet, farcical comedy star Alec Guinness, to be just a complete son of a bitch for a whole 3-month shoot with a ramrod straight up his ass, listening to no one, taking advice from no one, being super proper English officer. And I really think he's like, if I piss him off on day one, I'm going to get enraged, tough guy Alec Guinness. Wow. Look, I'm a big fan of actors acting and not playing practical jokes on them to get them to do their jobs. But I think Guinness won an Academy Award. So there's that.
There is that.
He at least got nominated. But anyway.
That's pretty cool. So it looks like it is about that time where we have to wrap up. But I did want to ask you, what are you reading right now, and what are you promoting?
What am I reading? I'm actually reading. A woman did I'm spacing on her name, and I'm sorry about it. A woman did a new translation of the Odyssey, which is one of my favorite things, and I think she's the first woman to do the translation, and her take on it is really beautiful and interesting. And I do not speak ancient Greek, so I have no idea if it is more or less, accurate, but I really like it. So I've been rereading that. I've been reading things to talk about them on my podcast, but usually just like I'm looking through them to find the passage that I like. I just reread the first trade paperback of Grant Morrison's reboot of the Doom Patrol because I liked the new TV series, and I was like, I remember vague echoes of the comic and the TV series, so I just wanted to see like what was there and what was old and what was new and what had been changed. So that was like the comic that I was reading. It does a thing that I think too many of the comic adaptations do, which is they're impatient to get to the really cool part. Like the new Swamp Thing TV series, I didn't finish watching it yet, but like episode 7 is called The Anatomy Lesson, and I'm like, no. Like, and the first, again, every approach is whatever, they can do it their way. But to me, the whole evolution of Alec Holland thinking he's a man whose body has been changed, who misses his old humanity, and slowly learning that he can do all the things a plant can do, that he can grow his arms, that he can do that, slowly, horrifically, and then suddenly finding out that he's not even human, he's not really Alec Holland, he's a plant that thinks he's Alec Holland. That literally took 20 years in the comic books. And they got to it by issue 7. And Holland knew how to grow his arms out and do all this crazy godlike stuff in the first episode.
Yeah.
And And I like the comic book version way better. And it's the same thing with Doom Patrol. The shocking ending of the entire Grant Morrison run, which might have been 30, 40 issues, was episode 10 of the TV show. I could have waited another 10 episodes to find out that that Niles Calder was behind all of their accidents. I would have hid that way longer, and it would have been a way bigger shock and way more powerful. And I love the show. I think it's a very good show. I enjoy everyone. I love Timothy Dalton, so I love seeing him play Niles Calder. I think he's great casting. But I could have used a longer tease on that. But that's trying to think what else is. I have a giant pile of comics by my bed, and I'm slowly but surely going through them. And what was the other question? What am I promoting?
Yeah. What's the next big thing you've got coming out?
So the current big things are the 2 Kickstarters, the Elvira the Omega Man and the Nightmare Theater Anthology, which I both recommend highly. Because of COVID reasons, the trade paperback releases from Dynamite have been slow. So this month, Elvira Mistress of the Dark Volume 2 drops. Betty Page Unbound, which is one of my favorite things I've ever written, drops. I love the Elvira too, but the Betty Page thing is Unbound is so batshit crazy. It was one of those things where I sent the pitch off and I said, well, that ain't gonna fly. And they were like, great, start writing it. And I was like, no, really? Okay. The setup is that Betty is this secret agent, whose cover is that she's a model. And she works for this proto X-Files division of the Air Force called Blue Book. And in the Halloween special 2-3 years ago, I had her encounter Yog-Sothoth, the Lovecraftian dimensional gateway character. Dynamite pitched to me, we want to do a series where where Betty Page is in the costume of a different Dynamite heroine every month. And they wanted a 4-part series, but they only had 3 that they really wanted to do. They wanted to do Red Sonja, Vampirella, and Deja Thoris. The 4th one was up to me. Nick, the CEO, president of Dynamite, he was like, look, the reason to get her in that costume on the cover can be wherever the hell you want it to be. I don't care. She could be making movies and wearing those costumes. It could be a fashion show. It could be an early science fiction convention, whatever. And I said, no, I've set up this fight between her and the great old ones out of Lovecraftian mythology. And Yog-Sothoth is particularly a doorway to other universes. So I'm going to do Crisis on Infinite Bettys. I'm gonna do Betty Page jumps through a dimensional portal and she's Red Sonja, and she jumps through a dimensional portal and she's Vampirella, and she jumps through a dimensional portal and she's Deja Thoris, and she jumps through a dimensional portal. And the last one I decided on, John Royal really loves drawing Betty Page as fantasy characters. He had done a Tinkerbell cover that I had never used. It just fell by the wayside for some reason. He did one too many. I was like, oh, episode 4, Tinkerbell. And so the first episode, she goes up against Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos in a Red Sonja-like world. The second episode, she's Vampirella, and she goes up against, that's the one with Yog-Sothoth again. Third one, they get bigger. The third one is Deja Thoris, and it's Azathoth. I remember my Lovecraftian deities. And the fourth one, she's Cthulhu. And the fact that I got away with writing Tinkerbell versus fucking Cthulhu as a comic book is something I will grow to my grave. Proud that I wrote. And the thing, talk about combining all the things you love in one comic book. The dimension, basically, there are these keys that lock the great old ones in their universe. Or they allow the great old ones out of Relia, their sort of pocket prison universe that they were trapped in at the dawn of time. So the whole thing is she's jumping through these portals trying to collect the keys. They're in all spread across parallel universes. And at the end of issue 3, the second act curtain crisis is Azathoth grabs all the keys that she has and then takes them to Cthulhu, and then all of the monsters are there. And I sort of connected Neverland, Skull Island from King Kong, and Relia from Lovecraft into one master location with pirates and lost boys and scary outer space monsters. And
that sounds absolutely charming.
And just using, talk about mythic resonance. She goes on a suicide mission to destroy the Citadel of Rillier with her friend Lissa, who has shown up in this universe as a mermaid, the crocodile that hunts Captain Hook, and the Peter Pan character, who I named after the actor who played Peter Pan in the animated Disney version. I think I gave him that guy's first name. There are a bunch of like faux Peter Pans in the story, but he's sort of the real one. And one of the great lines from that story is, "To die would be an awfully big adventure." And I don't know why I love moments like this. They penetrate the Citadel of Rillier, and all of the great old ones are standing around preparing the ritual that's going to destroy the universe. And tiny little Peter Pan, who's way smaller than Cthulhu. He's not Tinkerbell size, but he's small. Has a machine gun that he has, because, time has moved forward. All the stuff, they've been in there. The story takes place in 1953, technically. So the Lost Boys and the Pirates have a bunch of 20th century shit now. And he has a Lewis machine gun, which is a machine gun from World War I, which is a very iconic machine gun. It has a circular magazine on the top. So little Peter Pan pulls back the bolt on a Lewis gun, points it up at the great old ones, and says, "Today, to die would be an awfully big adventure," and lets loose with a machine gun. And I don't know why, but that kind of moment, everything we've been talking about so far, I love that moment in a movie. The moment where the hero goes, "Fuck it, I'm wading into a room of kaiju with a machine gun, and I'm just gonna fucking light them up." and
the cool thing is, for Peter Pan, that's like totally in character too.
Totally exact. Thank you. It's totally in character, and it gave me an excuse for him to mutter out under his breath as he's cocking a machine gun, "To die would be an awfully big adventure," and then rat-a-tat-a-tat-a-tat. I mean, again, I'm sorry to be so enthusiastic about my own work, but that comic fucking I love that shit. I could not be happier that I got to do it. Issue 2, the cover artist Scott Chandler, one of my favorite cover artists, recreated the George Perez cover for Crisis on Infinite Earths #1, but everyone is Betty Page. And, like every character that was on that cover, Psycho Pirate, or, Pariah is Betty Page, Starfire is Betty Page, Batman and Robin are Betty Page.
That's amazing.
It's hilarious. I bought the art. I had to own it because it was too... Scott gave me a nice deal on it, but it was too good. But anyway, read... If you read the Crisis on Infinite Betty, also known as Betty Page Unbound, which is the actual title of it. And yeah, I had so much fun writing her as Red Sonja, and writing her as Deja Thoris, and writing her as Vampirella. One of my favorite sight gags is she figures out right away that when she jumps through a portal, she turns into a different person. And the last panel of the first issue, she's in close-up, and her mouth is open, and she's speaking, and she's saying, "I wonder what's different about me this time." And she's got the giant Vampirella fangs hanging down in her mouth. Like she hasn't felt around with her tongue yet, so she does not know. But anyway,
Wow.
I have had such a great time writing comic books, and it has allowed me... I never would have guessed that the artistic fulfillment and the creative freedom that I wanted in movies and never, ever, ever, ever got was waiting for me in comic books. And that's pretty wild stuff to me. So if you want to read someone having a time of their goddamn life, read my comic books.
Well, initially, like the first thing you said to me earlier when we were talking about getting you on the show was that you are an absolutely awesome guest, and you have been. You've been so cool. I have this really bad habit of saying this has been the most amazing show I've done so far in the history of podcasting. But this one really has been incredible. And I wanted to thank you, David, and let you know that, dude, you got to come back. Seriously.
Oh, absolutely. Have me back anytime. Love to talk to you.
And that's our show. Isn't David awesome? More information about David can be found at his website, davidavallonefreelance.com. He's promoting his Kickstarter campaign for Nightmare Theater and Omega Man featuring Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. Guest links and more can be found at our website, which should be in the stream description. Titular Characters is a podcast about fan culture and interesting discussions in general, and it's produced by me, the lovely, the talented, the amazing Eva Webb. This week's cover art was produced by Empress Luxiva. She is a super amazing artist, and you have to check out her cover art on the website because it is absolutely awesome. She's a friend of the show, and she is super talented. Join us next time for a serious discussion with Professor Brian Fry about plagiarism. I'm looking forward to it.